So in terms of the topic of regulation and whether that's stifling innovation, and coming at the context as a venture capitalist, we look very much as this as a risk element, and whether there's cohesion between the European regulatory environment and the US regulatory environment, because we're looking to back businesses that have both potential. And so we have seen an increasing complexity in the European frameworks and an increasing complexity in the US. And so that means we are now focused on discrete investment opportunities because of that increasing complexity.
I think what it's saying, you need a different support structure. It's okay doing proof of concepts funds in the early stages, but then there's actually nothing there to continue this.
The 100, 200,000 pound clinical trial that's necessary. I'd agree completely.
I feel really big in the middle, because what it's showing is you got money for proof of concept, and you're interested once the risk is fairly is managed, how do you get from a concept to...
I'm not sure the solution is venture capital, because only 5% of the medical businesses are actually venture capital backed. A frustration of ours is the lack of joined up thinking between the European framework and the US framework, and actually a way of getting around that are for companies to be much more pragmatic and forward thinking when they're designing their own European trials, so that they can use that data then to flip in against the 510K or whatever in the US. And what we're seeing now is that medical devices are looking and smelling more like drug development.
Yes.
So the costs and the complexities are more like a drug development process than what we originally thought of as medical devices. And I think that's what the community is getting concerned about as well.
I don't think there is a dearth of innovation going on. If nothing else, the need in the marketplace is leading to an awful lot of primary research in universities. The problem is a lot of that doesn't reach the marketplace itself, because universities aren't very good at transferring that technology. And that really requires commercial people to come in and drive it forward. For them, the big problem is that the increasing cost of the regulatory framework means that it's becoming a zero-sum game. If your first 2 years potential turnover is already taken up with the cost of regulation, as it often is in the States in pharmaceuticals, then what is the driver behind taking these products through the regulatory framework?
I think there's a wider context as well. If you look at it from a small business point of view, it's not just the cost of regulations you have to face, it's the cost almost inherently of intellectual property as well. And the combination of those costs can be even more prohibitive. So there are some real issues. There's one thing I'd like to make, and I'm not sure how much sense this remark makes. I think fundamentally the healthcare sector is different from cars, fast-moving consumer goods, because the patient is not driving innovation. Meaning I don't think the regulatory framework is necessarily driving innovation either. The cars, mobile phones are driven by innovation because we want better and faster and so on. The regulatory framework is actually geared towards safety and evidence, which is essentially a different starting point. Having a medical background, I wouldn't lessen regulations, because you are talking about patient safety. So I wouldn't lessen, honestly, I would not lessen regulations.
Well, then there's
the obvious solution is dealing with the funding gap.
Yeah.
As a proof of concept fund, our remit is to stimulate innovation. And there are a number of projects that we looked at which came from the medical sector that we were unable to fund, because we simply felt that the cost of getting it to market was so great and the chances of raising venture capital so small that it would have been a waste of money to back them.
Which tells us in that case there's a funding gap to get these products into market, because nobody else is funding those either. And so, either regulation has to lessen on certain devices, or there has to be a funding gap addressed in that regard.